At Buckingham Palace, a subtle dance between power and protocol. At the heart of London, under a muted grey sky, the gates of Buckingham Palace creaked open to welcome a convoy of sleek black SUVs. With their tinted windows and bulletproof gloss, they bore the unmistakable aura of American diplomacy. Curious tourists pressed against the iron fence, phones raised in anticipation. Someone important had arrived. From one of the vehicles stepped Karoline Leavitt. At just 27, the White House press secretary moved with the confidence of a veteran. Her red dress stood out boldly against the palace's stone backdrop, her blonde hair perfectly arranged despite the breeze. She had come with the American delegation to strengthen ties with the UK, and perhaps in her own way to leave a mark. Her eyes fell on Lieutenant Jonathan Parr, the Coldstream Guard stationed before her. In his crisp scarlet uniform and shining black boots, he stood as immovable as the palace itself. Eyes locked straight ahead, posture rigid, rifle held with ceremonial precision. He was the portrait of unyielding discipline. Leavitt approached, with measured steps, stopping just shy of the invisible boundary that separated visitor from tradition. She smiled, a warm, practiced expression that had disarmed countless reporters in the White House briefing room. Here, though, it was more than charm. It was an offering. "Hello," she said, voice clear and sincere. "I'm Karoline, from the White House. A friendly gesture from you would make this moment even more meaningful, don't you think?" No response. Parr remained still, his expression unchanged. Around them, the courtyard hushed. It was as if the very walls of the palace paused to listen. Her smile remained undeterred. "I know you're a man of discipline," she continued, the playfulness in her voice underlined with respect. "But in America, a smile can open a whole world." A ripple of quiet laughter spread through the crowd. Tourists adjusted their cameras. A young girl tugged at her father's coat. "Will he wave?" she whispered. He shook his head gently. "That's not how it works, love." From the American convoy, aides exchanged nervous glances. One gripped a tablet tighter. "She's taking a risk," he muttered to a Secret Service agent who only shrugged, scanning the crowd without comment. Still, Lieutenant Parr did not move. His silence spoke volumes, echoing not with rejection, but with something older, deeper, a centuries-old commitment to duty, to tradition. He was more than a ceremonial guard. He had once stood firm in the war-torn corridors of Aleppo, protecting lives under fire. That quiet memory, unseen by those before him, anchored him now. Leavitt read the silence like a seasoned operator. This wasn't a press room or a campaign rally. There were no microphones, no retakes. Just one moment live, charged with history. She softened her stance, her voice now low, almost a whisper. "Your dedication is something we admire. It reminds us of the value of duty," she said, gesturing gently toward the crowd. "Isn't that what unites us? Strength and honor." A few clapped. A mother whispered to her son, "She's trying to make friends." Still, Parr remained unmoved. The tension pressed in, thick as the overcast air. Leavitt, no stranger to high-stakes moments, knew she wouldn't win this with cleverness or charm. She had not come to bend tradition but to acknowledge, and to offer something sincere in return. She leaned in slightly, voice soft again. "I bet you have some incredible stories," she said, eyes searching his face for the faintest flicker. "Just a small sign, to let us know you feel this too." But Lieutenant Parr stood fast. His gaze, locked on some invisible horizon, didn't so much ignore her as exist apart from her. A silent sentinel of another world. A gesture that never came. A smile that never broke. And yet, an indelible moment was forged, not in what was said or done, but in what was not. The courtyard standoff Karoline Leavitt stood tall beneath the grey London sky, her confidence unwavering, at least on the surface. She could feel the weight of every gaze, the phone still raised, lenses capturing each moment like history unfolding. Near the black SUV convoy, her team grew visibly tense. The communications aide, eyes fixed on his tablet, muttered under his breath, If this clip gets cut the wrong way, we'll be putting out fires all week." A Secret Service agent kept his hand lightly pressed to his earpiece, his eyes scanning the crowd, alert to anything unusual. But Leavitt was undeterred. She had weathered storms on the Trump campaign trail and stared down hostile press rooms with practiced poise. This, too, was a stage, and she wasn't about to exit without leaving a mark. She tried again, her voice laced with admiration. "You know," she said gently, "your steadfastness reminds me of American soldiers, always standing firm for what they believe in. Can't we share this moment together?" She opened her arms slightly, a gesture inviting unity. A few clapped. One American exchange student cheered. "She's really trying." But Lieutenant Jonathan Parr remained unmoved, stoic and silent, the very image of discipline. His breathing was so controlled it barely seemed to disturb the air around him. He was a living statue, rifle gripped, gaze fixed. The crowd's reaction began to split. An elderly Englishman, his poppy badge bright against a worn coat, whispered to his wife, "She's got heart, but she doesn't understand our ways." Freelance journalist scribbled furiously in her notebook. Leavitt faces formidable silence from the guard. A group of American students nearby live-streamed the moment with the caption, "Karoline Leavitt versus the Queen's Guard. Who blinks first?" But even the light laughter began to fade. The crowd slowly sensed there was something more profound happening. Parr's silence wasn't just stubbornness, it was a declaration, a reminder of tradition that could not be swayed by charm or charisma. The wind picked up, chilling the courtyard and heightening the moment's tension. Leavitt, with her sharp communicator's instincts, recognized the shift. She hadn't come to challenge protocol, but to create a memorable, respectful gesture. Yet Parr, through his very stillness, was telling a different story, one of unwavering duty and the quiet power of silence. Her eyes flicked toward him again, not with defiance, but with something more curious now. Was there any way through this ancient wall? Then, from a side gate, another figure entered with quiet precision. Major Caroline Brooks of the Royal Protocol Office walked with practiced authority, her navy uniform immaculate, her hair in a flawless bun, her gaze calm and clinical. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. "Who's that?" someone murmured. Brooks halted a few steps from Leavitt and took in the scene. The guard's stillness, the poised press secretary, the bristling tension among her staff. She tilted her head politely. Her voice, when it came, was firm and elegant, every syllable wrapped in a crisp British cadence. "Miss Leavitt," she said, "I'm Major Karoline Brooks. I must respectfully invite you to return to the designated guest area so that the ceremony may continue as intended." It wasn't a command, but it left no room for misunderstanding. Leavitt, ever the communicator, smiled smoothly, an expression both warm and strategic. "Major Brooks," she replied, her voice honeyed with diplomacy, "I deeply respect the traditions here. I only hope to show America's admiration for this remarkable institution." She turned briefly to the crowd, inviting their understanding. With her tone, a few nodded. One British mother whispered to her child, "She speaks well." But Brooks didn't budge. Her expression was calm, composed. She'd seen far more chaotic diplomatic breaches than this. At 40, Brooks had spent over a decade guarding the delicate seams of royal tradition, firm when necessary, always without offense. "We appreciate your sentiment," Brooks said evenly, "but the Coldstream Guards are a symbol of duty to the Crown. Close engagement may unintentionally disrupt that symbolism." Her words were courteous, but they drew a definitive boundary. The crowd shifted. An English veteran with medals on his coat gave an approving nod. "She's right," he murmured. "This isn't the place for improvisation." A journalist wrote quickly, "Brooks asserts tradition. Leavitt must choose her next move carefully." Leavitt felt the eyes again, still watching, still recording. She knew the stakes. Every second here was another headline waiting to be written. Her communications aide caught her eye from the convoy, his expression urgent. "She needs to wrap this up," he whispered to a nearby agent. Or we're looking at bad press. But Leavitt didn't panic. She'd faced worse. She remembered campaign debates where a few words could flip public perception, and she knew the value of timing. With grace, she nodded at Brooks. "I completely understand, Major," she said, her voice clear but respectful. "This tradition is what makes this place so special. I only wanted to honor it." Then slowly she stepped back, a small but deliberate movement, a gesture of understanding, a bow to tradition. A hush fell. Then a few scattered claps. A child with a balloon cheered, "She's awesome!" But Leavitt's gaze drifted once, more to Lieutenant Parr. He hadn't moved, not once. His silence and Brooks' intervention had reshaped the moment. The crowd no longer watched the visitor. They now looked at the guard and saw something deeper. Not resistance, not arrogance, but devotion, legacy, unshakable resolve. And in that silence, Karoline Leavitt understood the message perfectly. Brooks stood tall, her eyes sweeping across the courtyard, ensuring order had been fully restored. She said nothing more. Her presence alone was a clear statement. Tradition wasn't just being followed, it was being protected. Lieutenant Jonathan Parr remained motionless, a living statue in red, his polished boots gleaming, his posture impeccable. He embodied unwavering tradition, and the crowd, journalists, tourists, and officials alike, stood caught in a moment they hadn't expected. Eyes flicked between Leavitt and Parr. Though cameras were lowered, they remained at the ready, the air thick with anticipation. The cold London wind whistled through the courtyard, heightening the sense that something significant was unfolding. Karoline Leavitt, with the sharp instincts of a seasoned White House press secretary, understood the gravity of this moment. She was acutely aware that eyes around the world, amplified by social media, were watching. Parr's silence wasn't a failure. It was a gift, a chance to demonstrate finesse, to transform tension into a diplomatic symbol. She recalled her earliest campaign days, those press gauntlets where a single misstep could dominate headlines, and a perfectly timed pivot could rewrite them. Now, standing opposite Parr's immovable form and beneath Brooks's unwavering gaze, she needed a gesture that honored British tradition while signaling American sincerity. With a slow, deliberate motion that drew every eye, Leavitt reached into her handbag. From it, she produced a slim white envelope, its seal marked with the emblem of the White House. It had been prepared in advance for moments such as this, a token of diplomatic gratitude. She stepped forward carefully, ensuring she didn't cross the ceremonial threshold, and paused before a small pedestal situated near Parr, used on rare occasions for formal exchanges. The crowd hushed, breath held. A few whispered, "What's she doing?" Facing Parr, Leavitt spoke, not expecting a reply, but understanding the power of being heard. "Lieutenant Parr," she said, her voice warm and resonant in the quiet courtyard, "your dedication is deeply inspiring. On behalf of the United States, I extend our heartfelt thanks to you and the Royal Forces. This envelope represents our friendship, and I hope it will be kept as a memory of this day." With careful grace, she placed the envelope on the pedestal. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight, delivered not as a political maneuver, but as a tribute. She stepped back and bowed her head slightly, not as a high-ranking official, but as a guest showing respect. For a moment, silence held. Then came a ripple of applause. Soft at first, then swelling into something warm and genuine. It washed through the courtyard like a tide of release, a shared acknowledgement of grace under pressure. Some clapped for Leavitt, others for Parr, still stoic, still silent. Brooks allowed the corners of her lips to lift in a rare, subtle smile. Turning to an aide, she murmured, "She knows how to diffuse a situation." Her years of managing royal protocol had taught her to recognize when rules were upheld not through rigidity, but through understanding. Leavitt hadn't broken protocol. She had elevated it, turning potential disruption into a moment of unity. Leavitt's team, who had moments ago braced for backlash, now breathed freely. The communications aide, tablet still in hand, muttered, "She just turned a headline risk into gold." Even the Secret Service agent, silent all day, gave a small nod of approval. The atmosphere shifted. The wind still blew, but now it carried a sense of reconciliation, a quiet symphony between tradition and modern diplomacy. Leavitt stood tall, her gaze sweeping the courtyard. She felt the crowds shift, not viewing her merely as a visiting American official, but as someone who had shown respect for a culture not her own. Applause continued and phones were raised again, this time not to record controversy, but to capture an image. The white envelope resting on the pedestal beside Parr, who remained still as stone. A journalist's pen raced across her notepad. Leavitt transforms challenge into diplomatic grace. Parr, unmoving, remained the centerpiece. His silence, once a wall, was now a frame, one that gave Leavitt's gesture deeper meaning. He stood there, rifle in hand, gaze fixed, like a lighthouse amid waves of emotion. Nearby, Brooks scanned the courtyard once more. The ceremony could now continue, but she knew what had just happened would echo far beyond Buckingham Palace. It would be remembered, in London, in Washington, and wherever diplomacy is measured not just by policy, but by presence. She stepped back with a soft smile, as if yielding the stage to Lieutenant Parr and Major Brooks. Karoline Leavitt knew her gesture had struck a chord, among the crowd and beyond. Already, videos of the moment were spreading, telling a story of diplomacy, respect, and cultural connection. The white envelope placed delicately on the pedestal became the silent centerpiece. Small, yet deeply symbolic, it now carried the weight of a moment that transcended ceremony. The crowd, still applauding, began to look at Parr with renewed reverence. His steadfast silence was no longer a mystery, it was a lesson. Parr remained motionless, his red uniform and polished boots a vivid symbol of unshakable tradition. Nearby, Major Karoline Brooks stood watchful, her sharp gaze steady. She gave a subtle nod. Protocol had not only been preserved but elevated. What had begun as a potential breach of decorum had become a shared moment of significance. Social media lit up. A London user posted, "Leavitt just turned a tense moment into a diplomatic lesson." From New York, another wrote, "She's not just the youngest press secretary, she's a media genius." The hashtag Durham Friendship Letter trended globally. Not all were impressed. A British commenter argued, "She shouldn't have approached the guard. This is ceremony, not a stage." Yet even the criticism added to the story's momentum. Debates erupted across platforms. Had Leavitt overstepped, or had she bridged worlds? One journalist, still clutching her notebook, posted, "From the guard's silence to Leavitt's letter, Buckingham told a story today." Back at the convoy, Leavitt's communications aide was already shaping the narrative. His fingers raced over his tablet. "We need to own this moment," he muttered to a nearby Secret Service agent who gave a silent nod. A tweet was drafted for Leavitt's official account. "Today at Buckingham Palace, I was honored to deliver a message of gratitude from the White House. The US-UK friendship endures." The post garnered thousands of likes within minutes. Comments poured in, "She made America proud." And "This is diplomacy at its finest." Major news outlets jumped on the story. The Guardian ran the headline, "U.S. official leaves thank you letter at Buckingham. A diplomatic gesture impresses." CNN followed. Karoline Leavitt, youngest press secretary, shines in London. But not all coverage was glowing. A smaller, British outlet criticized, "Leavitt's move felt theatrical. Was it sincere?" Still, the conversation thrived. Under the gray London sky, the courtyard gradually returned to order. Yet something had shifted. What might have been a ceremonial formality had transformed into a story of diplomacy in action. Leavitt stood by the SUV, her red dress catching the breeze, her eyes lit with the quiet confidence of someone who had navigated a delicate moment with grace. She looked once more at the scene, Parr unmoved, rifle in hand, Brooks poised and watchful, the envelope still, resting peacefully like a promise on the pedestal. Brooks signaled discreetly to an aide, preparing to collect the letter according to diplomatic protocol. Leavitt lingered a moment longer, feeling the gravity of what had just unfolded. Not merely a photo opportunity, but a lived reminder of the power of small, meaningful gestures. The crowd began to drift away, but the air held a different weight, one of reflection. The changing of the guard resumed, drums echoing, boots moving in perfect rhythm. And when Parr's shift ended, he turned and walked away without so much as a glance at the envelope, disappearing under the palace arch as if untouched by the moment, yet having shaped it entirely. Brooks, her gaze sweeping the scene, knew the tradition had been upheld. But Leavitt's quiet act had added something new, a moment that would echo long after the applause faded. Inside the SUV, Leavitt scrolled through the responses. One post made her pause. Karoline Leavitt didn't just leave a letter, she left a lesson. She smiled, not with triumph, but with the quiet assurance of someone who had turned uncertainty into connection. She thought back to her early days, in politics, learning that diplomacy wasn't always about the right words but the right actions. Today had proven that again. The courtyard emptied, but the envelope remained, unmoving, like a whisper across history. In its simplicity, it spoke volumes. As the SUV disappeared beyond Buckingham's gates, the world returned to its rhythm. But something had shifted subtly, permanently. Lieutenant Parr stood as a silent symbol of unwavering duty. Major Brooks embodied the strength of tradition, and Leavitt, with a single gesture, had shown how sincerity could bridge centuries of protocol. The story of Karoline Leavitt at Buckingham Palace is more than a diplomatic anecdote. It's a lesson for our times. In a world of increasing division, political, cultural, generational, her action reminds us that respect doesn't need to be loud. It needs to be real. In today's America, where voices clash daily across news feeds, boardrooms, and neighborhoods, Leavitt's moment offers a simple truth. Bridges are built not through domination but through understanding. Parr's silence teaches us that strength can lie in restraint. Brooks' measured presence shows the value of upholding principles, and Leavitt's letter, quietly placed, tells us that diplomacy doesn't require grandeur, only grace. Sometimes, a small act, like a letter on a pedestal, is enough to change the conversation. Thank you for following this story. If it moved you, subscribe for more insights into the people and moments that bring us closer together. Until next time, stay thoughtful and stay connected.